This is Ed Petke with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is August 26, 2023. I'm conducting an interview with Mr. Erik Granrud in Nokesville, Virginia. Sir, can you tell us about yourself, where you were born, what's your name?
I was born in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. My dad was attending the Command General Staff College there at the time as a young captain, I believe. Grew up in the Army, traveled, we did 2 tours in Germany, late 70s and early 80s. We moved around the United States several places. I joined the Army in the delayed entry program that the Army was doing at the time. So I actually joined the Army when I was still in high school. Okay. In it was early 88. And then we actually moved, my dad got assigned to Korea, so to 2nd Infantry Division. So we actually moved with them to Korea. And then my report for basic training was in October of 88. So I actually had to report to basic training from Korea. And then from there, went to basic training in Fort Knox, serving with 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. After I got out of the Army, I just did 2.5 years active duty back when you could do that sort of thing. Did a couple more years in the Guard, in the Guard. And then at the time, then I went to college and I became an airline pilot.
Oh wow!
So now I fly airplanes for a living. I went from tanks to airplanes.
Quite a jump.
So
you mentioned your dad. Do you have any other military veterans in your family?
See, my dad, who retired is Jerome Granrud, retired as a lieutenant general. Passed away back in early 2020. I also have an uncle who's a retired Air Force, who flew in Vietnam, and I have another uncle who's also retired Army. He's retired Army as well. My grandfather, my father's side, his father, also Army veteran from late World War II and from Korea as well. On my mother's side, my grandfather did a short stint of service with the Canadian Air Force. Never deployed during World War II, but he did fly with the Canadian Air Force briefly.
So multi-generational and multi-country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you go into the Army because your dad was in Army, or was the Army always your thought, or did you ever have any thoughts?
Originally, I had notions of becoming an officer like my father and that sort of thing. And so yeah, he was kind of a motivation for me to join. They didn't push me to join at all. In fact, my mother was a bit perturbed by that notion, but my dad was supportive, okay. Especially going into the Army as an enlisted person.
Sure. Was Army always the choice?
Oh yeah. There was no other choice than to go in the Army. Right. So I wanted to be a helicopter pilot, but I don't have very good vision, as it turns out. The Army wants perfect vision for helicopter pilots, so I don't quite have that. Okay. So I couldn't be a helicopter pilot. Things might have turned out differently then. So, but yeah, my parents were largely supportive of it, and I wanted to do it before I went to college. I was planning on going to college, but I just didn't quite know what I wanted to do at that point. Did I want to, make the Army a career? Did I want to do something else? So I figured serving on the enlisted side for a while might help me gain some direction. So, and ended up going to war during it. So.
Yeah. And what war did you participate in?
Desert Shield. I deployed originally. My unit was one of the first few combat units to deploy to Desert Shield, and then of course we stayed there and were all the way through all of Desert Storm.
Okay. So you were in an Armored Cavalry Regiment.
That's right.
Can you explain for somebody who doesn't understand what that might be? What does that kind of job entail?
An Armored Cavalry Regiment is a little bit different compared to most other Army units, combat units that people think of in terms of armored divisions or infantry divisions, or even cavalry units. An armored cavalry unit is designed to be a completely self-contained, self-sustaining unit. We don't have much infantry. We have armor, we have scouts, we have our own air cav squadron, helicopters and the like. We have our own howitzer batteries. We have our own chemical corps, engineers, medics. So you can take an ACR and kind of put it anywhere, and it's capable of conducting most combat operations by itself.
So you're not having to link up with other units for other specialties. You bring all your own stuff to the party.
Essentially, yes. Now that doesn't mean that's how we were used, especially in Desert Storm, but that's the base capability of an armored cavalry unit.
Okay. And you were in a tank.
Yep, so I went to Fort Knox for basic training, and I graduated as a 19 kilo, was my MOS, as an M1 tanker.
Okay.
And I had a choice back then. The M60 was still a possibility as well, but I wanted the latest and greatest.
Sure.
So I went to basic training to become an M1 tanker,
Okay.
and then was assigned to Fort Bliss with the 3rd ACR after that.
What does tank training entail?
At the time, the Army was doing for armor training, we were doing a one station unit training, which means that our basic training and what people would normally think is our AIT or advanced individual training was actually combined into one. I think it was like one 14-week long course where you had basic training and then they just flowed right into your armor training after that.
Travel somewhere else, really?
No, it was all at Fort Knox, which is at the time, which is where the Army's armor school was.
Right.
So it was kind of one-stop shopping for us in that regard.
So what's it like the first time you climb into one of those things?
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I mean, the M1's a pretty big tank, quite a bit larger than our adversary tanks that you see out there, like the Russian T-72s and that sort of thing. It's big, but not as big as you would think. It's a big, massive vehicle, but on the inside, it's actually quite small. But it's pretty awe-inspiring. I mean, it's a big, heavy piece of equipment with a really big gun on it.
Yeah.
And it's for a very, very young, 18-year-old, private to be able to get in one of those, fire it up, drive it around, fire the gun, do all the things on it. It's pretty impressive. It's yeah.
What was your job on the tank?
Well, on the tank, you got 4 positions. You got the tank commander, you got the gunner, the driver, and the loader, and that's kind of in terms of seniority as well. The tank commander is always an NCO, usually an E5 or above. The gunner is often an NCO as well, like usually an E5. Driver and loader can be E4s and below. It really depends on what your unit happens to have in terms of manpower. But you're trained in all the positions. Okay. You're trained how to gun, you're trained how to drive, you're trained how to load the gun, do all those sorts of things. And even stand in the commander's hatch, if your commander gets taken out of action, right, somebody has to get up there and take command of the tank. So you get a little bit of training in that as well. My main job, once I deployed to my unit with 3rd ACR, I was assigned as a loader on the platoon leader's track. I was on Alpha 2-1, which is the first tank of the first platoon in our squadron.
Probably not a bad tank to be in because it's probably the most comfortable if there is such.
Actually, no. The tanks are all tanks. There's really no difference between the various tanks. Now the troop leader's tank, the captain, the old man's tank, has a couple more radios on it, but that's really about it. So yeah, I will say the nice thing about being on the platoon leader's track is that you were privy to more communications. You could hear. In fact, it was my job to help the LT run the radios. The radio rack is on the loader side of the turret, so I was there to change frequencies. I would take notes for the LT, that sort of thing. That kind of helped him stay in the loop as well. If he missed a call, it was my job to hey, you got to, the old man just called. So I got a little more. I tended to get a little more information than anybody else in our platoon, which was nice, right, but that's really about it.
So you almost to a degree you see the bigger picture more than others because you know where most other people
a little bit
to more weight, probably where you're going a little probably sooner than having to relay the information down the line.
To an extent, yeah, and I would help the lieutenant with the map graphics and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'd get a look at the maps, what our objectives are for the next day, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's kind of nice.
So what year did you deploy over to Shield?
Desert Shield, we deployed in, I think it was September 1990.
September of 90.
Of 90, okay. Yep.
So where did you guys fly into? Where did you guys land when you were over there?
We loaded up our tanks from Fort Bliss, and those got shipped out to Corpus Christi to get loaded onto the ships, and then take like a month-long voyage over to Saudi Arabia. We right next to Fort Bliss is Biggs Army Airfield, so we actually got to fly out on the craft flights, the civilian reserve air fleet flights, where the airlines send various of their airplanes. Yeah, exactly. And which was
more comfortable.
A lot more comfortable and really quite interesting in that everyone got on the aircraft fully armed. Yeah. All of us got on with all of our personal weapons and everything. So it's a little odd to get on a Northwest 747. Yeah. Carrying machine guns, rifles, right, all of your kit ready to go. And all the air crews are really great. All the air crews that do that were all volunteers to take us over, and they really treated us very well. So,
Nice.
and there was a lot of fond memories there. But we flew into, I want to say we flew, I can't quite remember because they didn't tell us. We flew into Saudi Arabia. It was either Riyadh or Dhahran, one of the two. It might have been Dhahran. And then from there, we got in at it must have been after midnight. It was probably 1 or 2 in the morning. And it was pitch black outside. And I remember the first thing when I stepped off the aircraft out onto the ramp, I thought there must have been some other aircraft with its engines pointed at us because we just got hit in the face with this blast of super hot air.
Mm-hmm.
And realized, no, that's what this place is like.
Right. And that's at night.
That's at night. That's at night. And they put us on buses and they drove us out to the port city of Jubail,
Okay.
out on the coast of the Gulf out there. And that's to a big port facility. It was a big empty port facility, warehouses, cargo handling areas, but there was nothing going on. It was just us. And we just set up a bivouac basically inside of these big empty warehouses right on dockside and just waited for a couple days later for the big ro-ro ships, the roll-on roll-off ships to show up with their tanks. And then from that point on, it was offload all of the regimental vehicles. And that went on for 24 hours a day for several days.
So how many tanks do you figure they brought over for when you were there?
Oh, they brought over the entire regiment. So that's a lot of math. I mean, my troop had we had 2 tank platoons, two Bradley scout platoons.
Many hundreds.
Yeah. So yeah, a couple hundred tanks and more Bradleys, M3 Bradleys in our case instead of M2 Bradleys. And of course, all the other regimental vehicles. All the tracks, the 113s, 577s, mortar carriers, trucks, recovery vehicles. I mean, it's an armored cavalry unit, so we're pretty heavy. We're probably closer to we're closer to being an armored division than we are an infantry division, shall we say, in terms of vehicles.
Right.
So
nice to have them when you need them.
Yes.
Okay, so how long did it take to offload that? Was it a couple days, a week?
It was several. I can't quite remember. It was definitely several days of 24 hours a day. Everyone worked in shifts, and because you had to get onto the ship, fire up the vehicle, drive it off, put it into a vehicle park. All the vehicles had to be segregated into their various unit parking areas and that sort of thing. So it definitely took several days just to offload all the vehicles and get everything in position. And
then you start moving out right away. Where do you go from there?
It was a matter of getting supplies. I remember having to. The unit had a water buffalo, and I remember filling the water buffalo with bottled water. They gave us cases and cases and cases of bottled water. We had to open up the hatch on top of it. Two of us would stand up there. The guys would throw us bottles of water. We had our big knives that everyone had a big knife. You just slash open the bottle of water, try not to cut your buddy's hand open, and just fill this thing up with water. And that just took hours. And then
that's not a fast process.
No, then finally somebody got a hose. They put some big water blivets out there, and they got us a hose. And I remember getting up on top of this thing with a hose, and the guy running the pump turned it on high, which then proceeded to shoot me right off the water buffalo. Yeah, that was good times. It's good times.
Sure, he had a good laugh.
Oh yeah, that was good times. Yeah. One thing that was kind of was eye-opening was that since we have an engineer unit, we had an armored vehicle bridge layer, a bridging tank essentially, and because Desert Shield, Desert Storm was before you saw IEDs, like you're seeing now, and suicide bombers and that sort of thing. At least the way we see them nowadays. But I remember they took the bridge layer and they actually deployed this big scissors bridge out in front of the entrance to the warehouses as a vehicle block to prevent a vehicle from being driven in there. And that was one of the first times it really started to kind of bring things home. Like, we might be going into dangerous way here. There's something potentially bad could happen here.
Right.
So
it's not something you probably would have thought about it being an issue.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. So we're in a foreign country. Somebody could decide they don't want us here and drive a van full of explosives, kind of like they did in Beirut, and kind of like what happened at Khobar Towers right after I left.
Okay.
I actually stayed in Khobar. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I actually stayed in Khobar Towers when we were rotating out of country, and several months later, that was actually blown up by Al Qaeda. So
did you guys work with any of the locals in the port? Did you have any local?
Not too much.
Helping out?
Not too much, because there really wasn't much for locals to do. There was no cranes to operate or anything. It was just driving vehicles off trucks and that kind of thing.
So you didn't interact with the native.
Not
much.
not a whole lot. Not to any. Not there. Some local trucks were being driven by locals. Some of the vehicle equipment moving, trucks and that sort of low boys and stuff, were being operated by just local hired truck drivers. But we really didn't have a lot of contact with locals at this time.
Okay.
So
those you did have contact with, did you feel like they were happy that you were there, or did you kind of feel like you were just an inconvenience or something they had to put up with?
We spent most of our time way out in the desert, and so the few locals I did run into, they were mostly happy to have us buying stuff from them. They were happy to sell us just food and whatever, and they didn't seem too put out by us because again we were out mostly just way out of the way in the desert.
Right. Before things really got ramped up the way they are now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So not much contact with the locals.
So when you leave out of the port, you go straight out into the desert?
Pretty much. We road marched out, and I forget exactly where we moved up. I never really got to see a big picture map. We kind of moved up north, and from that point on, we just would kind of move from location to location. Okay. We actually did set up at one point. We did set up a large base camp. And it was just out in the desert. There was no settlement or anything nearby, anything like that. We were out there.
So you're looking at sand and you're looking at the wavy lines of all the heat.
Basically, the area was moderately hilly. It wasn't super flat desert, although there were areas like that. And the engineers came out and they dug a berm surrounding the entire camp, and they put wire up out there. And we just parked our vehicles as if it was in a motor pool, and each squadron had a parking area. And that sort of thing, and we set up. We had a tent area, and it was just like it was a little bit like doing an NTC rotation out at Fort Irwin.
Okay,
that's probably the best way to put it.
So you're talking like football field size area?
For the entire regiment, quite a bit larger. I mean, the entire regiment was out there. So yeah,
we were all grouped together.
Yeah, okay. for the most part, yeah.
Okay. So did you marched out today, or did you rode the tanks out today? We road marched out, so we drove the tanks out there. Yeah. What's it like now? As hot as it is outside, is there any relief inside the tank?
No, not really. A lot of people think it must be like an oven in there, and yeah, the tank does get hot. It's not as hot as you would think because the sun isn't shining into the interior of the tank. So that's the big thing, is getting out of the sun. At night, it would cool off pretty nicely. But especially when you're moving, especially as loader, I've got my own hatch. I can stand up and put my get out into the breeze as the tank is moving, that sort of thing. The gunner is kind of stuck down in his hole in front of in his station, so he's completely ensconced inside of the turret. The driver, if we're not actually in action, can open up his hatch and he can have some airflow and that sort of thing. So it's not as bad as you would think, but it's not pleasant. No.
No, because you would think being in the middle of a desert in a big steel metal machine, it's got to just bake you like an oven.
It's not as bad as you would think. And at nighttime, when it gets cold, it's actually nice because the tank does retain some heat.
Okay.
And the tank does have a heater, but that's a whole different story. And it would stay warm in there for a while, but once you shut down at night, then things would cool off pretty good. Okay. So.
Very cool. So do you have, like, when you went out into the desert? I mean, you're in a general area, but you're not like in this town or that town or this and that. You're just in the desert.
That's right. Out in that part of Saudi Arabia, the main road I think it was called the Tap Line Road, the Trans-Arabian Pipeline Road. That was kind of the main north-south road out of there. Mm-hmm. And you might run into an occasional kind of small ville or a truck stop kind of area. Okay. But where we were literally out in the middle of nowhere.
You're more a grid square than a town. You're more a grid square.
That's an excellent way.
Points than something you can put a name on.
That's an excellent way to put it. I think we were in the general vicinity of Al Nahariya, but I can't swear to that though. Just in terms of general location. So
in the areas you're in, are there oil fields out in that area?
No, we were not in the, I think what was called the Rumiala oil fields. Okay. I think that's what they're called. No, we were not in the oil fields per se, but I do have experience operating in and around burning oil wells.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. That during Storm and Shield, when Saddam blew the oil fields, That was a major big
We-
thing. And
We definitely moved through some of those areas.
so what's your impression? I mean, what goes through your mind when you're going through just oil everywhere, fire, smoke? What's the feeling? What's the feeling? What's the thought?
It's like going through hell. Not in terms of, I don't mean in terms of, being under fire or gunfire or being in action. It literally was a vision of hell, because I distinctly remember at one point, and this was after the ground war started, and we're actually maneuvering, right?
Yeah.
And I remember at one point we stopped, and again, we're out in the middle of the desert. It's high noon, and the sky is absolutely pitch black. And there's smoke. The smoke had kind of risen up to a certain level, but there were just areas of smoke and areas of clear. But you could see just glowing wells in the distance. The sky was just inky black with just occasional light coming through. And the thing I really remember though was the reverberations of our howitzer battery nearby that was engaged in just multiple fire missions. They were just firing. We had the M109s, the 155 guns. Were out there just constantly shooting, and you couldn't see them. You could barely see them in the distance as the smoke shifted in and out, but the whole sky just vibrated. It just resonated to your core, and there's this black sky and the noise of the guns and the glowing wells off in the distance, and it was otherworldly. It was apocalyptic. Is probably, yes, a really good way to put that. Yeah.
Interesting. And as far, I mean, so you get some of the ground forces who actually had to actually sleep in that stuff. You being in the tank kind of shielded you a little bit from having to lay around in oil, but
the oil, there wasn't large lakes. Any oil was confined to around the wells.
Okay.
It wasn't like there was like rivers of oil flowing.
No,
all of that. Well, no, because that was all combusting.
Yeah.
That was all being lofted into the air. I'm sure around the wells, the immediate vicinity of the well, you would have oil.
Yeah.
But you would pretty much stay away from that kind of sort of thing.
You weren't driving around in a constant film of oil.
No, not like that. No, I mean I feel bad for the various air crews that had to operate. I'm quite sure that a lot of extra maintenance cycles on airplanes and helicopters because of that.
Oh, well, absolutely.
So
absolutely. How long did you spend out in the desert?
I was out there the entire time. So from the moment we road marched out. We were out there the entire time until I was rotated back out, which was right after they called halt operations. See, I actually had to extend my enlistment. I actually volunteered to extend my enlistment to go. I knew I was going to get stop lost. I knew it was inevitable that I get stop lost, but I decided, let me do this on my own terms. And so I actually extended my enlistment. And so when the war ended, when they called a halt to operations.
Right.
I remember my lieutenant came over to me and said, "Eric, pack your stuff, get off my tank." I'm like, "Oh, what did I do?" He's like, "They're sending people home now. Go, since you extended your enlistment, you should be home right now. So you get to go home first." So I was one of the first group of guys to go home, which was nice because I didn't get stuck with the cleanup detail, getting the tank cleaned up, ready to ship it back to the U.S.
You didn't really complain much.
No, not at all.
So basically, when you were out there, you're just moving. Hey, we need you to go to this point and hang out there. Then we need to go to this. Were you just covering a basic area, or were you pursuing anybody?
My unit was part of the 18th Airborne Corps, right? So you had 7th Corps to the south, and that's where you had second ACR, our sister unit. Our sister ACR unit was down south there. They were part. And other units, I think, were part of the Battle of 73 Easting and that sort of thing. That was south of our sector. So basically, if you look at a big map, my unit was part of the big kind of left hook that went all the way up into the desert and over like this.
Okay.
So, like I said, we were attached to 18th Airborne Corps. We had, on our right, I think we had 2nd Armored, something like that. You'll have to probably fact check me on that one. We had 24th Mech Infantry on one side, and we had 2nd or 3rd Armored on our other side. And
now, these units that are inside of you, or you just know they're on that side?
No, my unit wasn't part of the ones that was designed to maintain contact with them.
Okay.
Right. So you would have units, that were maintaining contact with these units, because that was one of the big problems. Because as you're moving through this desert, this big open desert, we were moving, from a mechanized warfare standpoint, we're moving at record speed.
So you're not just puttering along at golf cart speed.
We're charging,
down and going.
Pretty much, but you would have to stop because units would get ahead of you or behind you, And if you got too far ahead, that's how you end up with a unit behind you shooting you in the butt, which did happen. There was some fratricide things. In fact, our sister squadron, so I was in first squadron, second squadron, actually had a fratricide unit, because of that very thing. Because I believe a small detachment from the unit on our right, a different division, got stranded near an airfield, and they assaulted the airfield, and due to poor communications, they ended up with a fratricide, which was, and that one still sticks with me because my unit was scheduled to assault that airfield that was in front of us, but they had to pull us off because our squadron leader, one of his radios broke. So they pulled us off that attack.
Something simple like that.
Exactly, and they gave it to the next squadron. They attacked the airfield, and they had this very unfortunate fratricide engagement, and that very easily could have been us. And that's one of those ones that kind of still sticks with me. That
sure.
Because you're out there, it's at night, you're looking through. We have thermal sights on the tank, and you can see heat and all that. Is that a bad guy? Is that a good guy? And everyone was ready to shoot something. You're ready. I mean, you're ready to go,
right.
And
a lot of amped up.
And if you don't have good communications, if you don't have good liaison with your units to your left and your right, that's what happens.
Yeah,
you get a blue on blue, and that's not good.
Did you guys have any interactions with enemy forces?
You know what? Being out in the middle of the desert like that, not really. Not like the guys, like I said, not like, say, 7-3 Easting, where they charged out and just annihilated an entire Republican Guard unit. Saddam didn't expect us to be out there.
Okay.
One of the kind of the funny stories was this was the dawn of GPS, right? The GPS constellation had been, was up there, but it wasn't, the entire constellation wasn't up. So we only had GPS for part of the day.
Okay.
But some GPS was better than no GPS. And the GPS receivers, they called them sluggers at the time, SLUGRs. They were so rare that only the old man got one. Only each squadron leader, or troop leader, I guess I should say, got one. That's all you really needed, though, right? Because you're operating and using it. That's right. And because of that, we were able to operate in this utterly trackless wasteland of a desert. There was nothing out there. You'd have had to be a navigational expert to be able to go out there with just traditional navigation methods.
Sure.
But because of GPS, we were able to locate ourselves precisely. And because of that, every enemy unit we ran across was basically just a straggler or just kind of a rear guard kind of unit. Everyone we ran across instantly surrendered. I joked that we didn't need a gun that shot bullets. We needed a gun that shot MREs. Because you'd come across these guys, you'd throw them an MRE, and they were your best friend.
Yep.
I felt really bad for them. You'd see some poor guy with an AK with, he'd have an AK with one magazine, half uniform, one shoe. Doesn't want to be there. He's got no food, and here you go. Sorry, and they'd surrender. They'd very readily surrender to you. So fortunately, most everyone we came across just said, "That's it. We're done. Mm-hmm. We're done." Any
instances where you saw or heard or came into any contacts with the famous Scuds?
No, we didn't. No, the Scuds were all much further. Because it's a longer range weapon.
Yeah.
They were kept much further inside of Iraq than we were, and so we would listen to AFN, Armed Forces Network. Everyone that had like a little transistor, remember those days of transistor radios?
Yeah.
Had that kind of. This is well before the internet. Wow,
yeah.
I'm old.
We're dating ourselves.
That's right. And so we would listen in, and I remember hearing General Schwarzkopf's briefing, after the air war started, showing all these amazing videos of the stealth fighters going and blowing up all these Iraqi things in Baghdad. And I remember sitting out in the middle of the desert going, wow, I'd really love to see that. That'd be really cool.
It's hard to believe it's happening while you're there.
That's right. And you're like, well, if you say so.
Right.
But no, all the Scuds were, like I said, well inside of Iraq, and they were shooting those, into support areas. So we were safe from Scuds.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
any fears of chemical attacks?
Funny you should ask. That's going to be my war story. I figure you're going to ask me for a war story. So yes, chemical warfare was an area of concern. We were all issued MOP gear. We trained in it constantly. We did a lot.
As that was.
We did a lot of stuff in MOP gear. all the time. You always had to carry your mask with you. You always had to have your stuff on you at all times. You know, that was a very big deal. Right. Was making sure that you stayed up to speed with all that training. So we were absolutely trained for that. So after the air war started, we moved out of our base camps, of course, and we began moving forward, kind of into our start positions. You know, that took several days as the air war progressed, right? So at one point, we're in a desert logger. So we're out in the desert, and the tanks are all in a long line. We call that a desert logger, and the tanks are separated by several hundred meters. You know, just kind of looking up towards the northeast, looking towards Iraq. And we had camouflage netting up over the tanks, you know, in our positions and all that. And so I'm on guard duty, just walking around the tank at night. And all of a sudden, the lieutenant, he jumps up out of the tank, and he sees me, and he goes, "Go to mop 4, go to mop 4." And of course, mop 4 is put everything on. That's your mask, you know, that's your overgarment, your mask, your gloves, your shoes, all of it.
That's it's happening.
It's happening. And the way he said it, it wasn't like this is a drill. Hey guys, it's time for more training. He sounded frantic. He said, "Go to mop." He just yelled it at us. And I was like, I just stood there for a second like, oh my God. So I got up onto the tank, I stripped off my web gear and, you know, jumped down into the turret, left my web gear and my rifle on top of the tank. And we closed up the hatches, and I'm pulling on my gear, and I hear over the radio that some explosions had been observed out in front of us that had didn't cause much damage. Okay. And that's one of the things you look for a chemical warfare attack is ordnance being fired at you that doesn't seem to do a lot of damage. It doesn't make a big, like an artillery shell hits, but it doesn't make a big boom. It just kind of goes poof, which would be a bursting charge to disperse the chemical agent that's contained inside the artillery shell or rocket or what have you. And so that was being reported, that explosions, that impacts had been observed in front of our position, but with little damage. So, okay, that this might be it, you know. And we were all expecting Saddam to use chemical agents against it because he was known to have them.
Used it before.
That's right. Yeah, and exactly. So I'm inside the tank, and we're getting the tank fired up. You know, getting the engine started. I'm in my loader station, and I remember pulling on all my gear, and I remember my hands shaking. I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, not only are we going into action, but it's going to be in a chemical environment and all that goes along with that. Because if you survive that, then you got to decontaminate. Oh my God, this is going to be a mess. And so I remember my hands shaking. I was like, oh, okay. Get my stuff on, get my mask on. And the tank, you asked about how hot does the tank get hot? Well, the tank doesn't have air conditioning per se, but we do have an NBC overpressure system in the tank. So what happens is you can close up all the hatches, and because the tank has a turbine engine in it, we can bleed air off the turbine, and we can run that through an air conditioning pack, which cools that air off. So it's kind of like air conditioning, but not really. And when the hatch closes and with a round in the gun tube to seal up the gun tube, you can now pressurize the inside of the tank. So the air pressure inside the tank is greater than the air pressure outside of the tank, which prevents anything outside from getting in. And in addition, the tank has its own filter system in it. So tankers wear a different kind of protective mask than the infantry guys do. It's a mask. It's got a hose that runs down to a bag. Your filter canister is in the bag, and it's got a metal attachment on the back. Well, the tank has hoses inside of it that runs to its own filter system. And you can hook up that to your mask, and then you can feel that air coming into your mask, that pre-filtered air lifting the mask off your face, so you have positive air pressure. Once I felt that, and I felt my ears pop when the overpressure system came on, that's when my hands stopped shaking. I was like, all right, the tank's working. I'm getting my loader station in, and I'm preparing my station for action now. Right, and I have all these things I have to put in place. This guards to prevent me from getting hit by the gun breech when it recoils. I have to put together this little box to catch the spent caps that come off the gun after when we fire the gun. And I get my loader station into action. So once I'm ready for action, my hands stop shaking. Now I'm ready to go. Now I'm ready to do something.
You know, you feel as though you're safe.
Yeah. Now, yes. Now I'm back in control. And so the first thing we did once we all got suited up, got the tank fired up, we backed out from under the camo net, because that's the first thing you want to do is you don't want to stay in one spot, because if artillery, that they might be getting ready to shoot you. So we pulled out of position and then offset, as did all the other tanks, a couple hundred meters off to one side. And then by this point, the thermal sights cooled down, and we were able to kind of lay on and start scanning out in front of us. Long story short, it turned out to be nothing. It turned out to be a false alarm. That kind of thing happens. And the funny part of the story is once it all was said and done, we were able to open up our hatches and take all of our gear off and breathe some fresh air, which was nice. I remember looking around at the top of the tank, and I've said, "Where's my web gear?" Right? I was like, "Where's my web gear?" I'd left it right here on top of the tank. Where's it going to go? We didn't drive that far.
Right.
Well, it turned out that as we backed out from under the camo net caught my web gear and dragged it off the top of the tank, where the tank proceeded to run it over.
Ooh.
So I went back to our spot, and my canteen was crushed flat. My ammo pouches, my magazines were crushed flat. I had all these little 5.56 rounds, my rifle laying around all smashed flat. Like I had to go draw new web gear. Well, here you go.
On top of all that, all my gear is destroyed.
Where's your web gear? It's right here. Sorry, First Sergeant. I need your web gear. Yeah.
But I mean, it's true. I mean, and I'm sure you felt it as well. After you get over that initial shock, I mean, your training kicks in, and you almost do it as second nature.
That's exactly right.
And people complain, "Oh, we got to do this again. We got to do this again." It's for that very situation.
That's right.
Why you do things so many times, because you don't even have to think about it.
That's right. And to this day, I'm pretty confident I could still don mop gear and be ready to go.
Probably could. Not that you want to, but
no, God, no, never again, never again.
So, when you're on the move and you're going to these different places, when you stop, when you finally get to whatever your destination is, is there a typical time where you're hanging out in that one area before you're moving again? Does it vary?
It really depends. During Desert Shield, after the air war started, so we're in Desert Storm now, but the ground war hadn't started, because you remember there's two distinct phases. You had the air war, and then you had the ground war. And so during the air war portion, there was still lots of stuff, logistical stuff being moved up north, units being moved up north. So there was a lot of set up in an area, set up in a logger. At one point we had to set up near a roadhead where, a lot of logistical activity was going on. Trucks were coming through, stuff was being transshipped, transloaded, all that. And we just provided security. We're out in the desert, but it's still a vital point. So the tanks just set up in a big circle around that. And we just provided security for that area. And then after that, and then we get orders to move up again. So it was continuously moving up to what our expected start position would be. So it was sit in one spot for a couple days, move up again, sit in another spot for a couple days, move up again, that sort of thing. And just kind of the steady, slow but steady movement. I guess as the situation developed, I'm quite sure that at the much higher levels, they were moving all the pieces on the board to put who where and all that. And I was the guy just. I was from that little piece being moved around the board. So.
Okay. So what are you on when you get to your certain spot and you're setting up? Are you guys on high alert at all times? Is there any kind of relaxation feeling?
At that point, no, because again, we're still in Saudi Arabia, right? And the Iraqis did conduct one raid in force across the border. I forget exactly where that was. They sent a column of tanks across the border, and they promptly got all shot up. They got repulsed. And so that was a rare example of the Iraqis doing that kind of thing. But for the most part, when we were still in Saudi Arabia before we crossed the line into Iraq itself, we were on guard, but it wasn't like instantly ready for action, because they would have seen if large armored units or whatever. I mean, you always had to be careful of any kind of Iraqi special forces or sappers or that kind of thing. But by and large, we never had any intel to that effect. So it was mostly just, standard guard duty, rotate through guard shifts. Again, you're sitting out in the middle of the desert. It's a big flat open area.
Nobody's really going to sneak up on you.
Not really. We were kind of worried about packs of wild dogs at one point. It's kind of a little weird being out in the middle of the desert at night, walking, between tank positions and hearing packs of wild dogs off in the distance. Like you've got your rifle at the ready, like, all right. I'm not going to get eaten by a wild dog in Saudi Arabia.
How long did it take you to get up to the border?
It must have been a couple weeks, I think, a week or two. Thereabouts.
Did you know when you were crossing it? Or
not per se, no. It wasn't until about a day or so prior that we really got our orders, or we got our warning orders that, okay, this is when it's going to happen. Okay. So I think they were really trying to give the Iraqis a lot of opportunity to get out. And it was like, that's right. Are you leaving now? No. Are you leaving now? Okay, we're coming. Are you sure you're not leaving? We're coming. And then finally it was like, all right, we're going in.
When you crossed into Iraq, did you know the exact moment you were there? You were crossing that?
Oh yeah, the Iraqis had dug up a big double berm.
Okay, so
all along the border. Yep, they had like a big out in the desert, a big double berm. All just I don't know how far it went, from miles and miles and miles. And they had observation posts. And in fact, I still remember we got up to our line of departure, ready to go, and we were waiting for the engineers to breach the berm. And right before that, our howitzer battery took out an Iraqi observation, which we could hear the fire mission as they destroyed the Iraqi observation spot. Then the engineers went in with the dozers and they breached the double berm, and then right then a sandstorm kicked up, and it was good because we were able to breach undercover basically, and so we just all poured through this berm and into Iraq, and then set up in line, and then just started moving forward from that point on.
So a legit, like what you see in the movies, sandstorm?
Yeah, pretty much.
What was your impression on like an actual? I'm in a sandstorm now.
It wasn't super bad. I mean, there's different levels of sandstorms. You can get the really bad ones, that just cover everything for days and days. This was just kind of like maybe a squall. Okay. Just kind of a something just happened to happen in the morning kind of thing, and then it kind of settled out. It wasn't a really big bad one like you would see in, okay. like they did. I think they had during Iraqi freedom, during that big push. I think they had a really bad one hit, but right. The one we went through wasn't quite that bad.
So more of an inconvenience than a full on.
Kind of yeah.
Did you have any opportunities to have any kind of downtime where you could kind of relax and entertain yourselves? During
Desert Shield, at one point we did get some R&R. There was various opportunities for R&R. I mean, there were some soldiers, very few, I never got picked for this, that actually got to go, were hosted by families over at the Aramco compound.
Okay.
And some of the guys got to go do that. That was a pretty rare opportunity. I never saw that. Cavalry doesn't get much in terms of R&R in that regard. Hard life in the Cav. But we did. There was an R&R area they took us back to, and they had beds and proper showers and just an area. And I remember we could walk around in our PTs,
okay.
Right? But we still had to carry our mask.
Right.
You still had to carry your protective mask. But we're all walking around in our gray Army PTs, and they set up a hamburger spot where you could go get a burger and just take a shower. So I took 3 showers that day.
That's paradise.
Oh my God! Yeah, like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And just have a cot to sleep on, not a tank or to sleep on, or a tent or whatever. So that was a nice little break. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It's funny. I remember several years ago I was talking with an aircraft mechanic. I'm an airline pilot now, and I was talking with an aircraft mechanic who happened. I saw he'd served over in Iraq during Iraqi freedom. And I got to talking with him, and I said I was Desert Storm, and he said, "Oh, we felt really bad for you guys." And I'm like, "Why'd you feel bad for us?" He said, "Well, you guys didn't have email or internet or anything like that back then." I'm like, that's true. We didn't. I think I called home 2 or 3 times at the most, mm-hmm. right? But I said, you know what else we didn't have over there? He's like, that you guys had. I was like, what's that? I said we didn't have IEDs. We didn't have any of that. We were out in the desert the whole time. No IEDs, no suicide bombers, none of that. So you know what? I'll take no internet over suicide bombers any day, or IEDs any day, given what those poor guys had to put up with.
So did you guys go back, just rely on snail mail, just sending letters while you were?
It was mostly snail mail, and I remember seeing pictures of the mail, the big Army mail detachments. I guess it's either reserve or guard has these specialty mail detachments, and that's what they do. They handle just bulk military mail. And I remember seeing pictures of these just massive tents and shelters full of boxes and letters. And so those guys, those units are pretty neat. That's all they did, and they did a great job at it.
Cut out for them.
Yeah, they really did, and they did a really good job with that. It was really, getting that mail, care packages from home, that really meant that you just can't tell how much that meant. And the few times we actually got to call home, I think it was AT&T came out and set up this massive satellite dish. I mean, it was enormous satellite dish out in the middle of the desert, and they put up some big GP large tents, and they put up just phone banks in these tents. And you would get in line, and you would go into a phone bank, and you'd be able to dial home, and you could just Mom, it's Eric. Can you hear me? Yeah, no, it's Eric. Hey, how you doing? You know, I'm
good. I'm safe.
Yeah, it's good. And I only got to do that just a couple of times.
Right. But it's worth its weight in gold.
Oh, absolutely.
As far as a morale boost.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, that connection to back home, because you're in the middle of the desert, thousands of miles away,
yeah.
and the world is going on without you, or differently than
yeah.
you. But when you're in the moment, you kind of feel like this is the world.
Yeah.
And you forget the world, and it's nice to have that connection.
Yep. Yeah, not like today where you got the world at your fingertips.
It's instant.
Yeah.
Yep. And a lot of them nowadays don't. It's hard to impress upon them what that was like.
Yeah, I think we were closer to in terms of that kind of thing, we were closer to the World War II vets than we were to the to what we have today.
Send a letter and wait how many days for it to get in, and hopefully somebody writes back.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the incident about the chemical attack, and any other incidents that stick out in your mind when you think back to that time and say, hey, my mind goes back to this day, this incident, this.
There was
sad thing,
the really, I guess, exciting thing, I guess the closest to real action, because like I said, we were constantly moving forward, and everything we ran into had just surrendered or run away, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to hide an entire cavalry troop. So, one really funny instance was, so we're out there at night, and of course the army owns the night. We have night, even back then, night vision, thermals, and all that, and we do a lot of stuff at night. The Iraqi army, not so much. And most of those poor guys have no idea, what our capabilities are, right? Maybe nowadays, but back then, no.
Didn't even know what night vision.
No, not even remotely. They figure the sun goes down and then it's time to camp out. Yep. So we're online just during the ground phase, and we're advancing forward, and we're at a halt. And normally the way we advance is the Bradleys, the scout vehicles, are out in front of us, and the tanks are behind. So if the Bradleys get into trouble, then the tanks can come up and support them. So we're all sitting on line, we're at a stop, and everyone's just kind of sitting there idling. And one of the scouts call up and they say, hey, there's some stragglers out in front of us, a couple hundred meters out in front of us. And they look like 5 or 6 guys. They look like stragglers, just Iraqi stragglers, right? And so they send the first sergeant out in his track to go capture them. Mm-hmm. So the first sergeant heads out there, and I can hear the Bradley, kind of vectoring the first sergeant in. They're like, all right, he's up to your front, a little more to the left. Okay, you're pointing right at him. Then I hear on the radio, wait, I think they just heard you. They all dropped to the ground. And so then proceeds the first sergeant to drive right up to these guys, drop the ramp, get out. All right, guys, let's go. Get in. And I can just imagine these poor guys are out there in the middle of the desert, in the dark, creeping away.
They can't see us.
They can't, not realizing there's an entire cavalry squadron looking at them.
Yep.
And they could just sitting out there, and they're like, wait, shh, did you hear that? Get on the ground, get on the ground. And this track comes up. Come on, let's go.
Wondering how he found them.
Yeah, again, after a while, you felt bad for these. You felt really bad for these guys.
Yeah,
so
I mean, they had no idea just how under-equipped and undermanned and underpowered they were.
Yeah.
From us.
Well, and the scary one though was again, as we moved into an area that had a small kind of factory installation, just kind of out in the middle of the desert. It's kind of weird. And we got word that one of our Cobras from our air cav squadron, one of our Cobras had to set down way out in front of us, no man, out in bad guy country for engine trouble. And so they sent, those guys, put their Cobra down. They sent a Black Hawk out to grab those guys and get them out of there. Now it's just a Cobra sitting out there. So they called us up and said we need a detachment to go out and provide security for the helicopters so the mechanics can get out there, fix the Cobra, and fly it out of there. So they sent a couple of tanks and a couple of Bradleys. Now it's one of them. They sent us out there, and we're in this small, just kind of little built-up area. Not even a village, just some huts and some shacks and some vehicles, but it was all completely abandoned. At least the best we could tell, it was abandoned. And we had to clear the area. So here I am, a tanker.
Yeah.
I got to get off my tank, and I got to be a grunt now. And so here I am in my full tanker getup, with a rifle, doing stuff I'd never been trained to do. And me and some of the other scouts, who, they're scouts, they do have some infantry training. We proceed to clear this area, kick down doors. There's bunkers. We're going into bunkers, and in the end, we didn't find anybody. Everyone had been completely abandoned. But it was it was a little
out of your element.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, because up close in a tank, there's not much you can do really. So we provided security for this area, and then sure enough, they the air cav guys got a helicopter out there. You could see them over there working on the Cobra, and they got it fixed up and flew out of there. And then we were able to kind of egress the area and leave. But that was an interesting little interlude. Right. And we happened to we captured a bunch of weapons, a bunch of AKs. I found a whole rack of mortars. A whole case of mortar shells and that sort of thing, and I took pictures of that, and that was some interest to the intelligence people because it was chemical weapons. Turned out they were smoke rounds, but there was maybe some chemical weapons there. So yeah, it was something different. Yeah, it was something different,
something out of the ordinary to break up the monotony, so to speak.
Yeah, that was the part though. That was the part that gave me a little bit of PTSD later on. Was just afterwards when you think about you're kicking a door down and there could have been. There could have been somebody in there. The door could have been wired. There could have been civilians there, and like, oh my God, what if I shot a civilian? Just because again, we're all green. We're all green at this point. Could I? I almost had to shoot a wild dog. Fortunately, actually, a dog kind of came at us. I actually brought my rifle up to shoot it, and I squeezed the trigger, and nothing happened because I left the safety on, and the dog ran away. To this day, I'm very grateful the dog ran away. That I didn't have to shoot a dog. Right. So that worked out. That worked out. So
very good.
It also reminded me that if you're going to shoot your rifle, take the safety off.
Probably a good idea.
Rookie mistake.
But like you said, small victories. You didn't have to.
That's right.
So, how long did you spend in Iraq after you crossed that border?
We were the 100 hours. So it was 100. The ground war was 100 hours. Yeah. We crossed the line, and we were in Iraq the entire time. In fact, had we gone for another 24 hours, so on that night they called the halt operations. Mm-hmm. We had gotten our coordinates, for the next day's operations, and I remember pulling the map sheets out for the lieutenant. Yeah. And the last map sheet that I pulled out had Basra on it. Oh, wow. So if we had gone another 24 hours. We would have plowed right into Basra, and then from there, which is in, of course, southern Iraq, from there it would have been left turn, drive north to Baghdad.
Right to Baghdad.
Yeah. So, yep.
Missed it by 24 hours.
By 24 hours.
So after the 100 hours ended, and there was a halt to everything. That doesn't always mean there's a halt because you're still there. How long did you guys have to stay there after that halt? I was one of the lucky ones. Early. I got pulled out early. Yeah, and that's a whole different story right there because I got pulled out. Me and a bunch of other guys. They basically, my understanding is that the President Bush at the time, wanted to have a big show of the boys coming home. So they wanted a bunch of guys just immediately sent home. So I got lucky. I was one of that big bunch of guys that got sent home. So I got pulled off my vehicle. Back to the squadron rear area, and then they collected guys there, and then other guys got collected, and so we ended up as a big caravan in the back of a bunch of deuce and a halves, and there proceeded this 48-hour traipse through the desert, where I came closer to dying, more so than when I was actually in action. Because I have never been that cold in my life. We got rained. This is the middle of winter, by the way. Remember, this is February. Oh, yeah. In the desert. I was wearing non-mix coveralls, no insulating properties at all. We got rained on in an uncovered deuce and a half. We're sitting out in the middle of the desert. We were lighting truck tires on fire to stay warm. We had no chow. Wow. And finally, we got to an airstrip, and they started flying in C-130s to come fly us out. But we had to be careful to not get off the road leading to the airstrip because there were mines everywhere. There were cluster bomblets everywhere. There were mines everywhere. It was just like, stay on this road, otherwise you'll blow up. Right. And they finally flew us out of Iraq in the back of a bunch of C-130s, and they flew us into Riyadh. And you never saw a dirtier, scuzzier looking bunch of guys in your unshaven.
covered in black tire soot, filthy, right out of the desert.
Just, almost like an old.
And we, that's right. And we flew into a rear area where everyone's in clean, shiny uniforms, and we look like the Dirty Dozen or dirty several dozen.
But I mean, in your mind, it's like, all right, I'm essentially home.
Essentially.
You know, so how long did you stay in Riyadh before they shipped you back to the States?
They got us into Riyadh. Like I said, they put us over in Khobar Towers, which was a big, huge apartment block. It was completely empty. They weren't furnished or anything. And we stayed there just for, I want to say, it was just for a couple of days. Basically just for out processing. You know, we just got all of our gear together. That was I finally got a shower, even though they didn't have the hot water turned on. I still enjoyed a nice cold shower. Got to enjoy the porcelain convenience for the first time in many, many weeks. And I remember this. We all just passed out on the floor in this empty living room. All of us just passed out on the floor.
Yeah.
And they set up chow for us in the parking garages of this place and all that. And we just hung out there for a couple of days while they got things in order. And then when it was time to go, we actually had to clear customs. They actually made us clear customs. And I remember they told us that. So a lot of our gear got combat lost in Khobar Towers. Yeah, a lot of ours, because you can't have any dirt on anything. Are you kidding me? Almost just covered in dirt.
Right, yeah.
So a lot of the dirty stuff just got left in Khobar Towers. There was a big pile of clothes and gear just in the middle of this floor. Like, no dirt. No, I'm traveling light today.
The cleanup crew probably.
Yeah.
Happy with you?
No. I think, yeah. So then we flew home on another craft flight.
And what's it like when you get home?
I remember we flew out of Riyadh. It was in a Pan Am 747, and it was great because they left the cockpit doors open, so there was a steady flow of guys up into the cockpit to say. No, I can't do that now. I remember looking over the captain's shoulder, looking out into you could see the desert below us. And the thing I remember for that, well, I was part of the bag loading detail, so because of that, I got to sit in business class. Right, that was nice.
Wow.
Because that was hard work loading all those bags into a 7.4.
Yeah.
And I remember we had to do a fuel stop in Milan, in Italy.
Yeah.
And I remember as we were on approaching to Italy, I remember looking out the window. I had never seen so much green in all my life.
Yeah.
The green just saturated my vision. I was like, oh my God, look at all this green. Because of course the desert is almost completely devoid of anything green, right? And so it was just a quick stop in Milan, and then we took off again. We had to fly we flew into JFK and to Kennedy, more fuel stop, and then we actually had to fly to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because we had 101st Airborne on board.
Oh, okay.
We had to drop off 101st. They got off the airplane, and then we flew back to Biggs Army Airfield, where we offloaded there, and then we were home.
Very nice.
So,
and happy to be.
Yeah, it was great. There was a huge crowd of people.
Sure.
It was funny. I was the second or third guy off the airplane. The first guy off the airplane was a corporal sitting in the seat next to me, right? As soon as the door opened up, some officer came on board and asked for, I forget his name now, asked for this corporal. And he's like, oh, I'm right here. He's like, let's go. Your wife just went into labor. They yanked him right off the aircraft. That's right. They yanked him off the airplane and got him up to the hospital. That's right. So they got him right out of there. That was pretty nice.
That's cool.
And then I got off, and there's this huge crowd of people, this big sea of people out there, just to greet us. So that was pretty cool.
Civilization probably took a little bit of getting used to getting back to.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Period.
Well, even then, I mean, I got back. I guess it was March when I got back, and then I PTS'd after, shortly after that. I actually got out, and I went to school at the end of the next semester. I actually went to school, went to college. I went to University of North Dakota, where I did all my flight training. And even then, so I reported there, and I reported to college. And I guess it was August. And this was not too long after I'd gotten back. And I remember still, you'd hear things, you'd hear some noise, and you'd still kind of alert and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Not like, gosh, and I really don't want to overstate it. Not like some of what a lot of the guys have been through here. Yeah. I mean, I've heard some really, truly, truly awful things of what happened. Again, with things like IEDs, and some of the really intense urban combat that the guys have seen. So but PTSD is a thing, and it stays with you. So fortunately for a lot of us, it fades into the background, but for others not so much.
Right.
And to this day, when I hear things like that, then it's
takes you back.
Yeah, it takes you back, and I can really sympathize, and it's if there's one thing we really owe these people, it's as much help as they can possibly be given. To if you've been if you've got a traumatic brain injury because you've been hit by 3 IEDs and you've watched your driver being incinerated, and those are stories that I've actually heard.
There's nothing that shouldn't be done.
No, when a guy can look at you casually and tell you about how his driver was incinerated in a striker, and you know that person is that's someone that needs as much help as they can get.
And deserves it. And
Yeah.
should get it.
Absolutely.
So theoretically, 50, 60 years from now, maybe your great grandchildren are going to be watching this video of me, you and I speaking today. If there's one thing you would want them to know about your military experience, what would that be?
I was very proud to do it. I grew up in the Army, and I think my life has had 2 phases. One was to serve in the Army. I grew up in the Army, and I did my service in the Army. And then I took those skills and what I learned, and I put them towards what I do now. Now I'm an Airbus captain for JetBlue Airways, and I've flown for them now for over 18 years. And if there's 2 things I was ever good at, it was being a tanker and being an airline pilot.
2 mutually exclusive things.
Actually, you know what? Being a tanker is a lot like you work as a crew, you work as a team.
Yeah.
You have a technologically complex piece
More dials and switches.
of equipment to operate, and the 2 actually kind of go hand in hand. There's a few of us out there. Say hi to all my tanker buddies that are flying the line now.
Well said.
So,
is there anything else you'd like to document about your experience that we didn't talk about today?
I mean, there's so many war stories. There's so many little events. There's so many silly things. There's good. There's bad. I'm happy to have the opportunity to tell some of this, and I really wish my dad could have done something like this, because of course he had a hell of a career too. Starting off as an air defense artilleryman, reporting to a Nike battery up in Anchorage as the Cuban Missile Crisis started. 2 tours in Vietnam, one as an army advisor, one as a DeVarty for 101st, and he wore 101st on his Screaming Eagle on his right shoulder, air assault, and he had a lot of really good, outstanding stories too. And I remember the one story I'd like to tell from my dad was, I remember telling him that being an airline pilot was stressful. And he looked at me and he says, "You know what's really stressful?" I said, "What's that?" He says, "Being a 26-year-old second lieutenant in charge of a dozen nuclear warheads. That's stressful." And he's not kidding.
No.
And that's the best part about the military and the Army, is they take young people, young men, young women, and place them in positions of considerable responsibility, and give them the tools they need to excel and be successful, and to make us the best country in the world.
Amen.
Yeah. Brave Rifles.
Yes. Well, sir, on the behalf of the Americans in Wartime experience, I'd like to thank you for sitting down.
Thank you.
And speaking with me. I'd like to thank you for your service. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.